No, Professor Bokpin, this is why I bring you in, because what we were talking about was the sentiments of the people. But you've seen clearly the fight for credit as to who should be giving credit for the state of the economy now, as we are saying. Clearly, a lot is pointing in the right direction, as was captured in the budget by the finance minister. And in fact, the IMF document in the fourth review also captures their own diagnosis of what the state of the economy is in terms of the direction and then also achieving policy targets. This fight for credit as to who should be giving credit for where we are now, what's your verdict on this?
Well, thank you very much. Certainly, governance is a continuum. We recognize that we have come very far and all of that. And Alfred, not to do the politics of it, they do this kind of optics against each other, right? If you review the 2017 budget of the MPP when they took over after the 2016 election, and you even take a careful look at the State of the Nation Address 2017, I mean, you will see these optics running across and all of that. But we can discern where perhaps there's a change in terms of direction in how things are done. Mm-hmm. And typically, I don't rush in attributing credit. Mm-hmm. But of course, again, after the 2016 election, mm-hmm. we were under an IMF-supported program. And the previous administration had equally made some good progress, mm-hmm. and all of that. In there as well, we learned that because of the way we organized the 2016 election, mm-hmm. we had more or less or substantially derailed the program objectives at the end of 2016. The new administration put in measures to bring back the program. Again, you can see history repeating itself in 2024. Mm-hmm. But, Alfred, I think that there is considerable room, that's my view, mm-hmm. and Ghanaians should forgive me. There is considerable room for the current administration to take credit.
There's considerable room for the current administration to take credit.
You cannot run away from that. The data is supportive, and I'll give you the basis. If you look at the pace of progress we're making until 2024, and you look at the pace of progress after the change in government, you can see clearly a new direction, clear intention, a certain drive to make development people focus. Right from COVID, mm-hmm. The prominent call was that we need to switch substantially to expenditure-based fiscal consolidation. Unlike the traditional revenue-based fiscal consolidation that puts a lot of burden on households and businesses. The previous administration did not listen. Alfred, that's a fact. Mm. I've compared the two regimes.
Yes.
In 2017, when the MPP took over, right, they actually increased total expenditure in 2017 over the 2016 base by more than 30%. That's how much expenditure shot up over 2016. Mm. That is not fiscal consolidation in all the elements of it. But look at what this current administration has done. In 2025, and that is why, if you read the IMF fourth review report, mm-hmm. substantial credit was given to the current administration for the aggressive approach towards expenditure cuts, or what we call expenditure-based fiscal consolidation, in restoring the program, and also part of why we are seeing this kind of progress. If you look at, in nominal terms, how much the current administration actually shrunk expenditure, mm-hmm. huge. That is not the only thing. if you look at what the finance minister presented during the media review, apart from cutting nominal expenditure in the actual budget, in the implementation, you will see more than 1.2 billion Ghana cedis in the expenditure cut, so as to more or less like bring the economy back on track. What that does, and the space and the confidence that gives to monetary side to also do what they have done, is that there is now fiscal discipline that allows monetary policy to be deployed effectively to bring down inflation and then subsequently engineer growth. So for me, and again, look at it this way. If you look at the first 6 months of the NPP's administration in 2017, the rate of inflation coming down was much slower than the rate at which we've seen inflation decelerating in 2025.
The first 6 months.
In the first 6 months. In fact, inflation, the NPP took over inflation of 15.4% in December 2016. By June 2017, inflation had come down to 12.1%. The current administration took over inflation of 23.8% December 2024. June, inflation had come down to 13.7%. If you look at the rate of disinflation, quite aggressive. You can trace all of this to fiscal measures. You can trace all of this also to monetary intervention. And again, I've said on this show that if the previous administration, the governors of Bank of Ghana, had 40% of the level of fiscal discipline and leadership we see right now, they wouldn't have left office at the exchange rate that they presided over. Because as at October 2024, they had enough reserves to push down the exchange rate. But of course, given the uncertainty with the fiscal side and in the run-up to the election, the propensity of fiscal indiscipline showing up consistent with our past records and all of that were very high, for which reason, they did not do what they wanted to do. So I think overall, I want to say that I've seen leadership here. I've seen, and I believe that the Minister of Finance couldn't have done what he has done without a strong backing from the president. Because if you look at the level of expenditure cuts or fiscal discipline, we haven't seen anything like this in our recent history. That's a fact. You can check the data. You can check. I've looked at budgets from 2001. I've looked at up to the current budget. I've tracked all of them. And you can see a certain drive towards expenditure-based fiscal consolidation, quite good, without burdening the faithful few in terms of taxes and the rest of them. Of course, there is a price. We have to manage a trade-off, and this will be my suggestion.
Right.
We have to manage a trade-off in such a way that the aggressive expenditure cut, expenditure-based fiscal consolidation, we need to manage it going forward so that it doesn't weigh heavily on growth in the third quarter to the fourth quarter and going forward. And I understand from the proposition the Minister of Finance gave that they are aware of that. And that is why I have said before that 2026, 2027, 2028, the government cannot operate the same budget they are operating now with this same approach going forward, because they will need to manage the trade-off and begin to spend progressively. Whilst I commend, and here I commend the minister, because this is the optimal intervention that they needed to put in place, and the results are quite clear. And therefore, of course, we don't have a nationally approved formula for sharing credit as to which portion should go to the previous administration. Maybe you are a political scientist. You should be doing that. You should be doing that for us.
It will happen. It will happen.
You should be doing that for us.
It will happen.
I think that
politicians are selfish.
In as much as, and of course, I've also said that if you look at the reserves the current administration came to meet, we need to give credit also to the previous administration for building reserves and handing it over to the next administration. At the end of the day, it's Ghana that has won. I believe that beyond the optics, when these politicians sit down and they reflect, they know that they didn't only take over liabilities. They took over assets, They do it to each other.
Exactly.
But there's a reference that you make and about the current state of affairs. That's important. You say that if the previous managers of the central bank had 40% of the kind of leadership that this central bank leadership is showing now, things would have been different.
I'm telling you, things would have been different. And look, let's go back and look at the press conferences that the previous governor had consistently. In fact, in the run-up to the crisis, which peaked in 2022, you could see clearly the governor raising concerns about fiscal indiscipline. Look, under the monetary policy framework that we are using, we call it inflation targeting. One key requirement for inflation targeting to be effective actually does not lie in the hands of the central bank. The key requirement for inflation targeting to be effective rather lies in the hands of the politicians, which is fiscal discipline. So you need fiscal discipline in order for inflation targeting to be effective in bringing down inflation and engineering goods. So once you deny the monetary side, that fiscal discipline, there is no way they can deploy monetary policy. In fact, it's the first time in a more recent of our history, let me put it that way, that we are seeing a strong coordination between the monetary side and the fiscal side. We are seeing, to a large extent, the complementarity between fiscal and monetary, which Governor Addison didn't get. So under the previous administration, our analysis tells us that instead of pursuing monetary policy as being complementary, we were rather pursuing it as subordinate to fiscal policy. We were essentially using monetary policy to sweep the mess created by the fiscal side. And it's the reason why we switch extensively to money printing, monetizing the deficit and monetizing our debt. When it happens that way, it doesn't matter the level of knowledge and technical insight from the central bank, they are incapacitated.
That's the over 60 billion loss that the Bank of Ghana recorded.
Yes, and that is what we call fiscal dominance of monetary policy. It renders the monetary policy largely ineffective.
So if you put it in clear terms, the governor was subordinate to the finance minister.
Yeah, a servant.
Ofori Attah, you're saying Dr. Addison was a servant to Ofori Attah?
Yes. I'm not saying it in terms of any other. I'm looking at the data, and that's what tells us. And you can look at the press conferences that the governor made consistently. Without being direct, he was raising concerns about the fiscal side, which perhaps was constraining the monetary side from doing what they have to do. And essentially, that's it. And again, go back to the Alfred. Let's go back to the original IMF-supported program. And if you look at the diagnosis of the IMF about the interaction between fiscal and monetary, you can see it's exactly the same point that I'm making here. I think that we've made enough mistakes in our history since 1992. And I'm happy, and let me say this, it looks to me that this government has listened and has listened adequately in terms of calls about the direction this economy should go, and they deserve to take the credit because you see, the measured expenditure cut that we had spoken about consistently over the period, and you would agree, right? This government has done that in a year, something that could have been done over 3 years or so. They decided to do it in a year. We criticized the IMF-supported program when it was approved on May 17th. 2023, simply because the fiscal consolidation was heavily based on revenue rather than expenditure. And we said that is not the way to go, okay? But look at something, the IMF is now telling us and crediting the current administration for the aggressive expenditure cuts that they have done in 2025 budget alone. But of course, as I said, we cannot continue on this part because the trade-off would now outweigh, and I believe that they are aware. The question now is, how do we manage that delicate trade-off and switch to progressive spending? Again, let me say that whilst the minister is on track, and the minister indicated that they are spending, I agree to a large extent, but this is where my disagreement comes from. The government is on track when it comes largely to social spending, spending on education, spending on health, and social protection and the rest of them. But the government is not spending appropriately to match our infrastructure deficit that we need to invest in order to spell growth. Well, it's not his fault. It's not his fault. It's the current dynamics and all of that. So when we say that we are not spending, the sacrifice is in the area of capex. Right. So you could see the minister spoke about the fact that they are on track with Govt, National Health Insurance Levy, and they are social spending, wages and the rest of them. But then when it comes to paying contractors, arrears, and all of that, and also capex, you could see that the data there looks a bit dwarf. And here, I'm not blaming the minister. Given the current circumstances and the fact that they want to spend within their means, this seems optimal now, and I believe that going forward, they will begin to recalibrate the fiscal framework so that we can spend appropriately in the area of infrastructure to spell job-rich growth.
I'll come back to you whether the big push details would answer that question about spending a lot more.
Listing roles you are going to do is different from actually committing revenue right now to doing it.
I don't want to say that. Okay. I don't want to say that. My roads.
The point that I'm making is that I've seen that in the media review, they've outlined rules that they are going to do. These are good intentions. And I think I acknowledge that. But I'm saying that listing them, that we are going to do this and this, until you see commitment, cash flow disbursement, it's not going to happen. Look, you go back to 2017, go back to 2018, 2019, and see roads we have listed in our national document.
Fred, I'm not cutting you short. These roads I've mentioned, I'm just saying, you can go to Kwesibuchi, you can go to Kwame Pepra, you can come down to Osofoma, all of them. These two more roads at BoG has appeared in all these budgets. Again,
I'm putting it within context. I'm saying that under the current dispensation, the optimal approach is what government has adopted. And look, Alfred, I can just imagine the finance minister in the midst of his colleagues with all this expenditure cut and all of that, right? And I'm saying that there's no way he could have done this without a strong backing from the president. You see leadership on the table. But I'm also saying that going forward, and the minister had clearly indicated, so when they list those roads and all those things, they are telling us that 2026 budget will reflect all of this. Yes. And that is where you see the dynamics beginning to change and all of that. But whether we like it or not, when we say sacrifice, and politicians have called on Ghanaians to sacrifice and all of that, we've seen leadership when it comes to sacrifice in the 2025 budget. You hardly see opulence among ministers. And all of that, which is quite good. Look, if you go into the detail of the 2025 budget and you see the wasteful expenditure cut, even from the executive, and you look at it even from the judiciary, and you look at it from parliament and all of that, you can see that everybody is making considerable sacrifice. And that is the only way you can cut that expenditure, take away those tax handles, and still be able to record a primary surplus of 1.1% in the first 6 months. That's quite impressive. We have reduced our fiscal deficit to about 3.8% from the 4.1%. In fact, actually below the target we used to have in the Fiscal Responsibility Act of 5%, right, which we passed in 2018 and all of that. All of these things are good. Is the reason you have seen inflation decelerating sharply. And of course, that is good. It doesn't mean that prices are falling necessarily. It means that prices are increasing at a much slower pace now than before. Year on year, we can say that even if we look at June figure of 13.7%, by world average, is still very high. But of course, given where we were per our own worst performance, this is pointing in the right direction. So I'm expecting that from 2026, 2027, and all of that, that is quite good. And it's also comforting, Alfred, to see that government is on track in terms of our repayment. And there was something the minister said. In fact, before 2024 election, we had raised those issues about the maturity clustering of our restructured bonds in 2027 and 2028. I am happy that they are looking at building the sinking fund. The challenge also is that there's always trade-off. The money you store in the sinking fund, even if it's going at a certain interest rate, there's trade-off because you could have invested that money in financing infrastructure and all of that. But this is where we find ourselves. And I think it's all about how we manage that trade-off going forward so that we can have progressive spending and then to be able to engineer job-rich growth.
And the fiscal consolidation that you talk about, and that's one of the leadership that you referenced, that the finance minister couldn't have done this without the backing of the president. And we've seen that in many areas as well, and the cutting down of what you have always talked about, the governance cost.
Yes.
And the commitment to reduce the governance cost, as we have seen. Over time, when politicians talk about either sharing the burden or biting the bullet or tightening the belt, you see the pendulum swinging more to us, the people.
The mere mortals.
But you say that narrative has changed.
I think in the 2025 budget, you can see clearly that there's leadership by example on the table.
Okay.
The question is whether we'll be able to sustain that, right? So if they are able to sustain that, in fact, if this government with this approach, we had a fiscal space to be able to spend appropriately with a level of efficiency, we are likely to get higher growth. And again, if I look at the media review, I look at the IMF supported program, I think that, of course, my expectation was that Ghana should be declassified from high risk of debt distress to maybe moderate by now. But of course, given that the IMF program review looked at just December end data, okay, because if you look at the aggressive strengthening of the currency and what that has done to our debt dynamics, and then you again look at the fuel levy, right, which is bringing about 2.9 or so billion Ghana cedis to the revenue stream. If you recalibrate the numbers, I think that we should be exiting the zone of high risk of debt distress to a more moderate. What that would also mean is that we can take advantage of that and probably renegotiate with our external bilateral creditors and the multilateral creditors so that we increase the cap on the how much project we can finance per year is $250 million. I think that is just too small, given our infrastructure deficit and even the priority list that the government has agreed with our the bilateral and then multilateral, including the IMF, and the fact that we'll finish that by 2028 looks too long for me. If you look at all that, the gains we are seeing right now, and you travel out of Accra, you see pain. The roads are not there, the infrastructure is very bad and all of that. What we need right now is to be able to act on time and at scale in terms of infrastructure development, because we've got the leadership. And of course, in this country, it's very difficult to guarantee credible leadership for long, right? So if you have it, you want to be able to make the most of it within that time. But I think that overall, somebody said that NDC's gain is MPP's loss. MPP administration could have done this. They could have.
Now, since you referenced the external debtors as well, and what we are having to do going forward if the debt dynamics change, and how that picture will also reflect on honoring our external debt obligations. Yesterday, we got the information from the Finance Ministry that Ghana and France have signed this bilateral agreement to officially grant Ghana debt relief under the country's external debt restructuring program.
Yeah, under the G20 common framework. That's
instructive and a very important development when it comes to the debt dynamics. But let me acknowledge the presence of the Honourable Member of Parliament.
Yes, of course, Alfred, that is also a build-up on what the previous administration had done. If you look at the roadmap, the previous administration, in terms of signing the MOU and all of that, and of course, also for initiating the debt restructuring, which was as a result of the sacrifice of the people. Of the people, even including our external commercial and external bilateral. It has been painful, but it has also created a certain fiscal space and room for this government to be able to launch the many interventions that they have done. And others have said that leadership is a continuum and all of that. Of course, they've done it at a certain scale that is a departure from the kind of this thing that we have seen. So,
Attah